What if it was Cap who triumphantly entered Wakanda in Infinity War instead of Thor? Not only that, but what if Bruce Banner and the Hulk fused together to become Professor Hulk in the film's final battle? And what if Thor didn't go to Nidavellir to forge Stormbreaker, but instead fought a giant serpent? Believe it or not, all of these things almost happened. So let's dive in and find out what happened behind the scenes to arrive at the movie we got, and also take a look at what could have been Infinity War. While writing Guardians of the Galaxy, Kevin Feige told James Gunn that they were thinking of making some of the stones featured in previous films Infinity Stones, and asked Gunn if he could write a scene explaining what they are and where they come from. The result would be the scene with the Collector, which Gunn said he wrote in 3 minutes. Not only that, but the Power Stone in Guardians was originally red, but after deciding to retcon everything and make the Ether in Thor the Dark World the Reality Stone, Gunn had to change the color of his stone in post-production to be purple. This kind of last-minute rewriting and retroactive tinkering shows how Marvel was often making things up as they went along, and flying by the seat of their pants during the Infinity Saga. For instance, a different Infinity Gauntlet had already been shown in Odin's vault on Asgard in Thor, but once Thanos was teased with the real gauntlet at the end of Age of Ultron, Marvel had to backtrack, and revealed in Ragnarok that the first one was just a fake. Kevin Feige even admitted that it was tossed into Thor as a harmless Easter egg, before the Infinity Gauntlet storyline was ever in development. Similarly, Tony Stark's workshop in Iron Man 2 featured what looked like an unfinished Captain America shield, another Easter egg with no real plan behind it, as Marvel had a knack for throwing in these Easter eggs to excite fans, even if they didn't actually make sense until they were forced to patch it all together later. To write Infinity War, Feige approached Joss Whedon, writer and director of the first 2 Avengers films, but he was burnt out after making both of those movies. Not only that, but he would later admit that he didn't really understand Thanos or know what to do with him. As a result, Captain America writers Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely would be hired to pen the script, and they wrote at least 6 different drafts of it, meaning the movie was almost radically different. An early draft of the script sent both writers into a panic because, as they later admitted, no one liked it, with many criticizing Thor's storyline. Instead of seeking out Eitri with Rocket to forge Stormbreaker, Thor and Rocket would have had to retrieve Stormbreaker in battle against a giant serpent. In Norse mythology, the Midgard Serpent, also known as Jormungandr, is so massive it coils around the earth, destined to rise during Ragnarok as Thor's ultimate nemesis. It was a big, myth-inspired spectacle, but on the page it felt more like a side quest than a crucial part of the main narrative. Most importantly, it had little connection to Thanos, unlike the final version that tied directly into the tragedy of Eitri's people, being slaughtered after forging the Infinity Gauntlet. Thor's characterization was also initially written with him as the straight man of the group, just as he had been in earlier Avengers films, but Chris Hemsworth showed up to set insisting that the character needed to change. Ragnarok was filming at the same time, and once the writers saw Taika Waititi's reimagining of the character, they realized Hemsworth was right. Thor was being completely retoned. According to the writers, after the Dark World, which they also wrote, nobody was calling Thor their favorite Avenger. But in Ragnarok, by leaning into Hemsworth's comedic timing and willingness to play the fool, he suddenly came into his own. As a result of Thor's original storyline battling the Serpent, he wouldn't have triumphantly entered Wakanda to save the day. That was originally meant for Captain America. As Anthony Russo explained, the core premise of Infinity War was always that the Avengers lost to Thanos because they were divided, because of the fallout between Tony and Steve. The difficulty of getting them back on the same team was the emotional backbone of the movie. Therefore, the writers thought he should be absent for most of the film, since he was a fugitive and living underground hiding from the government. However, bringing Cap in so late to the film didn't sit well with Marvel. The Russos originally felt it was the right creative choice, but after pushback from the studio, they brought Cap in earlier to give audiences more time with him and balance the ensemble, while the dramatic Wakanda entrance was given to Thor instead. At one point, Infinity War included a sequence where the heroes entered the Doctor Strange realm known as the Mindscape, forcing each of them to confront themselves. In this version, Banner would meet the Hulk inside the Ragnarok arena, and their conflict would ultimately lead to the debut of Professor Hulk during the Battle of Wakanda. The plan was for Banner and Hulk to strike a compromise when Hulk refuses to come out, allowing him to burst out of the Iron Man suit mid-fight and finally unleash his full strength as Professor Hulk, which was a merging of his 2 personalities. The problem was that this moment felt too triumphant. The third act of Infinity War was designed as a steady march toward defeat, and introducing Professor Hulk there gave the audience a win that undercut the tension. As a result, Marvel scrapped the sequence late in the process, removing Professor Hulk from the film entirely. Additionally, they also had to reshoot the first act of Endgame, where the remaining remaining Avengers travel to Thanos' country Lodge since it used to have Professor Hulk in it. Instead, in order to show how each surviving Avenger had changed after the snap, Professor Hulk was introduced in the diner scene after the 5-year time jump in Endgame. But for many fans, this change felt like a missed opportunity. Hulk never got his revenge on Thanos, or any real moment of catharsis for his crushing defeat early in Infinity War, something the deleted sequence in Infinity War would have delivered. Originally, Infinity War would have opened with Thanos laying waste to Xandar and annihilating the Nova Corps in his quest for the Power Stone. In early drafts, the storyline would have also introduced a new character, Nova, aka Richard Rider. The idea was that Thanos would wipe out the Nova Corps, leaving only Richard Rider alive. He would then become a lone survivor, emerging as the herald who warns the Avengers of Thanos' arrival, the same role Bruce Banner ultimately plays when he crashes into the Sanctum Sanctorum. The sequence was reportedly close to 45 minutes long, but the Russos ultimately decided it wasn't needed. They felt the audience could easily infer how Thanos obtained the Power Stone without seeing it take place on screen, and adding such a lengthy detour would only bloat an already overstuffed film. Ultimately, while the sequence was filmed on Xandar, the VFX were never completed due to the massive cost of finishing them for a sequence that would never see the light of day. In the first Avengers mid-credit scene, Loki's failure in New York is reported to Thanos, with the warning that challenging the Avengers is to court death. Instead of being deterred, the Mad Titan grins knowingly. It's a deliberate nod to his original comic book motivation, which stems from his desire to impress Lady Death, the physical embodiment of mortality itself, by destroying half of all living beings in the universe. For a moment, it looked like the MCU was setting up the same idea, but the Russos ultimately chose not to introduce Lady Death in Infinity War. Adding a brand new cosmic entity would have complicated an already packed story. As writer Stephen McFeely explained, it would have required creating an entirely new plane of existence the MCU wasn't ready to explore. Instead, they offered subtle nods to a role in the comics, like Red Skull's flowing cloak in Infinity War, which evoked her iconic design. The filmmakers also didn't want to overload the cast with another major character, especially since Infinity War needed to devote time to establishing Thanos himself. To do this, at one point, the writers experimented with telling the entire film with Thanos' narration, giving it the feel of a gangster epic from his perspective. While it helped them explore his voice and motivations, they felt it became repetitive. Additionally, they also tried writing flashbacks of a younger Thanos on Titan, showing him growing up and eventually passionately arguing for his plan to save his people. But these scenes felt too reminiscent of Jor-El warning Krypton and Superman, plus it bogged down the pacing. In the end, they settled on a flashback with Gamora, which not only revealed his ideology, but also laid the groundwork for the emotional gut punch of sacrificing his own daughter later in the film. The writers originally planned to dive deeper into the children of Thanos and give backstories to each. In the comics, Proxima and Corvus are married, and early drafts included storylines exploring that relationship. In the finished film, the only trace of it is Proxima's reaction when Corvus is stabbed, a subtle nod to their bond. Ultimately, though, these character threads were cut because the story was already bursting with characters competing for screen time, and it was felt the spotlight should stay firmly on Thanos. Additionally, the Black Order's powers were also scaled back from the comics. Jonathan Hickman's run had made the Black Order nearly unstoppable, but the creative team worried that secondary villains might outshine Thanos himself. To avoid that, their abilities were redesigned to create more dynamic battles with the Avengers. Ebony Maw, for example, was reinvented as a sorcerer-like figure with precise control over matter, making him a unique threat without overshadowing his master. When it came to the Guardians, the Russo brought in James Gunn for input, and several of his ideas made it into the script. He not only picked the Rubber Band Man by the Spinners for their opening sequence, but also insisted that Star-Lord would have followed through on Gamora's request to kill her, something the script originally had him unable to bring himself to do. One note the writers didn't take, however, was Gunn's belief that Star-Lord would never have lost control and struck Thanos, the moment that ultimately doomed the universe. The Russos have also revealed that Peter Parker's heartbreaking farewell to Tony Stark wasn't scripted in full. On the page, the only line written was "I don't feel so good." Wanting to push the moment further, they asked Tom Holland to improvise, and what followed, his desperate pleas of not wanting to go, became one of the most emotional scenes in the film. The filmmakers later explained that Spider-Man's spider sense allowed him to feel the snap taking effect before it did, which is why his death lingers longer than the others. Adding to the devastation, James Gunn confirmed that Groot's final word before turning to dust was "Dad," spoken to rocket. It was a subtle detail not heard in English, but one that underscored just how cruel and personal the snap really was. In the end, Infinity War was a film built on constant rewrites, discarded ideas, and last-minute changes, as Marvel spent years flying by the seat of their pants, retconning the ether into an Infinity Stone, randomly asking James Gunn to dash off an explanation for what the stones even were, and rewriting entire character arcs on the fly. Yet all of that chaos still funneled into one chilling moment: Thanos snapping his fingers and proving that, despite everything, he was inevitable. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.